Well, we didn't think necessarily they had killed before. Wouldn't surprise us if they'd been violent before. I mean, her injury, she died of ligature strangulation. To us, that did indicate potential planning. And again, nothing else to indicate she had a lot of defensive wounds. So she was either somehow incapacitated. Now, she was reported to have been extremely intoxicated that night. And so was it that she was passed out or the offender came behind her and she didn't have a chance to pass out? But it certainly seemed there was an element of planning because of that, because of the ligature strangulation. And certainly somebody who probably doesn't have a lot of empathy for other people or, very likely cold-hearted individual. Those are, some of the obvious things that we would take away. And these are things that we would say other people in their lives will recognize.
That's Julia Cowley, a retired FBI profiler and the host of the Unsolved podcast. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Julia Cowley is a retired FBI agent and criminal profiler and host of the Unsolved podcast. This is our second episode on the 1996 unsolved murder of 20-year-old Karina Holmer. Julia and I have explored many cases together, from the University of Idaho murders to Julia's first case as a lead profiler, the murder of a San Francisco man, Philip DiMartino. I was a reporter at the Boston Globe when Karina disappeared, and Julia came to the FBI's Boston Field Division a few years later. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on Karina's case. In the last episode, we discussed Karina's background, her arrival in the United States, becoming an au pair. We also talked about how she was described as joyful, adventurous, and eager to explore Boston. We talked about the timeline of her final weekend, which began on June 21st, 1996, when she went out with friends to the Zanzibar nightclub in Boston. Karina's friends left, and she was last seen outside the club around 3 a.m., intoxicated and alone. 2 days later, her dismembered upper body was discovered in a trash bag inside of a Back Bay dumpster. Police interviewed more than 300 witnesses, including her employer and a Boston police officer she had briefly dated, but the crime scene was never found. We discussed why the case stuck with both of us. For me, in many ways, the contrast between Karina's innocence and joy versus the brutality, mystery, and coldness of her death have been haunting. Julia talked about how profiles start by examining the crime scene details, victimology, and disposal methods rather than chasing speculative suspects. We contrasted Karina's murder to that of Elizabeth Short, who is dismembered in a case that is often referred to as the Black Dahlia case. Today, we're going to pick up our conversation where we were discussing the dump site and the club where Karina had been the night she disappeared, and what we knew about her plans. Well, that's another interesting thing too, and thinking about when she left Zanzibar and she was seen walking on Tremont, where she was kind of going in her head during that time. Whether, do we know whether she planned to go back or go with her friends, or do we know anything about what her plans were for that night?
We don't know what her plans were. She had arrived and gone out with friends. She'd arrived at Zanzibar with friends, and they all split up, and she was left at that area. The bar was closed. She was out on the street, and she was seen talking to various people. And they're varying reports, but those are the last credible sightings of her. Now, I did see a report where she was caught on a camera at a convenience store not too far from the dumpster. It was like a 24-hour type store. I've never seen that confirmed by police. I don't know if that's true. I find it hard to believe that she walked all the way from Zanzibar. I know it's only a mile, but again, it's that
It's a
mental
30,
barrier.
and it's also like a 30-minute walk across the highway.
Yeah, yeah, it's so and I would think that during that time somebody would have seen her and there would have been reports that she had been seen other places, but so I couldn't verify she was actually seen at a convenience store, but in any event, we felt she was likely transported in a car,
Yeah.
where she ended up. I think she got into somebody's car from Zanzibar.
It's interesting you said about the mental barrier. I was just thinking about the fact that, I have some stores that are right along this road that are near me that are walkable. But I can also walk over here, relatively close, walk up a sidewalk, and just very quickly cross a highway. It's absolutely safe, and there's a Best Buy right over there or down that way. I rarely ever go there. And it's not because it's further away. It's because that mental thing of crossing Route 7 and going past those lights is almost this psychological barrier that makes it feel like it's further than it actually is. And so I'll walk to places that are actually further because they're on my strip,
Mhm.
my sidewalk. It's
Yeah.
interesting to think about the things that kind of get in our in our in our way. Did you guys, from your work on doing it, did you get any indications? Because I know there's some cases where you look at the nature of the crime and it sort of feels as if, or the evidence would suggest that this is somebody who had killed before. Were you able to get any insights about the person, the potential perpetrator?
Well, we didn't think necessarily they had killed before. Wouldn't surprise us if they'd been violent before. I mean, her injury, she died of ligature strangulation. To us, that did indicate potential planning. And again, nothing else to indicate she had a lot of defensive wounds. So she was either somehow incapacitated. Now, she was reported to have been extremely intoxicated that night. And so, was it that she was passed out or the offender came behind her and she didn't have a chance to pass out? But it certainly seemed there was an element of planning because of that, because of the ligature strangulation. And certainly somebody who probably doesn't have a lot of empathy
Yeah.
for other people or very likely cold-hearted individual. Those are, some of the obvious things that we would take away. And these are things that we would say other people in their lives will
Know
recognize.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember when we talked about Phil, just as a contrast in Phil DiMartino's case. You know, you said somebody who doesn't have empathy, and I think for a lot of people, they think, okay, that's got to be the vast majority of killers. But I remember as we were talking about Phil's case and the note that the guy wrote and some of the clues that he left, you know, and thinking, okay, there was a lot of his personality was on the table, and it would be a very different profile than somebody who could have dismembered and cleaned the body and 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 I mean, it made me think in this case, like maybe in Phil's case, the perpetrator ran away or could have committed suicide or may have gone to the confessional afterwards. It really does give you clues about.
It does. I mean, like, you look at Phil's case, and there was a lot of emotion involved.
Mhm.
There were attempts at staging. There was some religious overtones to the notes that the person left. I do believe that person's probably struggling with guilt.
Yeah.
And whether they're still alive or not, I don't know. I mean, statistically, they probably should be, but this is probably something that does weigh heavily on them. And I'm not saying that to garner any sympathy for that person because they need to pay for what they did to Philip. But contrast that with this killer. This was a very cold and calculated murder of Karina. And there was no, what I would consider, gratuitous violence. Like Phil, lots of gratuitous violence in that just multiple wounds that were inflicted after, post-mortem because he was dead, because the offender was in
Rage.
such a heightened emotional state. That's the
Frenzy,
opposite
I
of
guess.
Karina's. Yeah, almost. And it wasn't done in a way that you see the postmortem activity like on Elizabeth Short's body, which
Right.
was very intentional and sadistic. That was different. You can see when you really study the crimes, you really see the difference. Whereas Karina, no gratuitous violence. She died of ligature strangulation. It was, cold, calculated. It was done. And he didn't need to do anything else other than to now get rid of her, which he took made practical decisions. This is the best way that I can do this. And I have to do it because if she's found quickly and identified, people will know that I'm linked to her.
Right. Right.
They saw
Right.
me with her, or they know I have a relationship with her.
Or some element of it. Yeah, something about her identity and her body being found needed to be delayed or
Yes.
everybody needed to be on a wild goose chase. And the
Mhm.
person kind of got that in her not
They
being
did.
reported, right?
Yeah, they did get that. They got that extra time where not only was she not found, because I think she was probably dumped early Sunday morning, and then she was found Sunday afternoon. So they had that time. And then they had the time from when she's found until when the police are able to finally identify her, which, I mean, it didn't take a long period of time, but it gives the offender more time. He was able to put time and distance between her and his offense.
Do you take anything away from the part of her that was found or wasn't found, or do you think that her being found to some extent was just dumb luck by the
I
homeless?
think it was just luck.
Yeah, just luck.
I think the offender fully intended that she would not be found.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about the idea: did the offender work harder to get rid of one part of her body? But I really do, with everything you're saying, it makes me think this offender was just being very practical, like easier
Yeah.
to carry the body if it's in two
There's
pieces.
been speculation. Well, he sexually assaulted her, so her bottom half was never found, or she was pregnant. She was not. That was
Yeah,
confirmed
'cause
by the police. She was not pregnant. I mean, that was one of the the theories that someone got her pregnant and murdered her because of that, but that is not accurate at all. But I just think it just, you know, if you don't want her identified, you really don't want her top half found because it's got her fingerprints, it's got
face,
her face. So that's the part you probably wouldn't want found. So I think it was just dumb luck.
right?
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.
And
I
then
don't think there was any rhyme or reason
to
for
that
not
piece of
finding
it.
her bottom half other than he just got lucky.
Yeah, and part of it too, the dissection piece of it too, for me, it makes me feel as if it was more of a practical choice, because if what you were really trying to do was like obliterate identification, Long Island serial killer, we saw that, body in at least one stage of it, body parts everywhere. Um, One of the things, we talked a little bit about the idea that, and, you know, in our world of social media, I love to complain about, I think our true crime coverage and our speculation in some recent cases. But in researching this and thinking about this case, it reminded me that same speculation, I pulled up some old Boston Herald clips and pulled up some old New York Post clips. That same kind of speculation went on then. And I'm curious, as maybe not a part of your profiler piece of it, but maybe investigator and profiler. How do you guys keep all that noise out of your way when you're working on a case like this?
I just compartmentalize. It doesn't affect me at all. I know I have to keep a clear head and just look at what the facts are. What am I seeing? Applying our profiling concepts, applying the research, the statistics. If we're going to diverge from those, we need to explain why. Because you have to have some basis for what you say. You have to cite evidence. You have to cite your reasoning. And so if in one case you say, well, the offender did this because of this, this is what we normally see. If we're going to stray from that, we have to explain the reason why. So I just block it out. I just look at the case and what do I see and what do we know from what our education and training and experience have told us in other cases, and apply that to the cases and don't stray from that. And you and that goes right to the heart of why profiling isn't an exact science, because there are going to be outliers and there are going to be times where like, well,
Yeah.
we don't usually see that. That is an outlier. That is not statistically probable in most cases. But we do see the bizarre. We do see the bizarre. But, I've done cases on our show. I did cases at the BAU where people have a very strong opinion about something, and it's very difficult to tune them out. They want you to go with their theory. And I'm
Adopt
like,
their
I
theory.
just, yes. And he's like, I can't because this is what I'm seeing. And if I stray from that, I have to have a good reason, not just because you think this person did it. I need to have a good reason because that's not the behavior I'm seeing. And I'm applying all my normal concepts. I'm applying the research and my experience. And so you just have to stick to that. And whenever I have strayed from those basics, and this is maybe mistakes I made earlier in my career, I was wrong. Like there are some cases where I just like, I think a woman did this. It's like, no, a woman, and I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
It just, when I strayed from something, you just have to have a good reason why. And there has to be evidence of why you're going off, your typical profiling concepts. So that's how you just do it. And you do enough cases and okay, this is what we typically see in cases like this. So we've got to stick to that.
Yep. And
which
knowing
leaves you open to being wrong.
Yeah. Because there are always going to be outliers on the scatter plot. But what I think really works, for profiling is it's dangerous to deal with outliers when we're just looking at one thing. But let's say if we're looking at 11 different factors, they might be an outlier, but they're not going to be an outlier in all of them. They're not going to be, we have yet to meet the sui generis killer who is just an outlier in every statistical area. So if you bring enough of those together, which brings me to the question.
And what I was going to say, one more thing, you can't get swayed by emotion either. You cannot get so wrapped up in either your feelings toward what happened to a victim or your strong feelings toward a suspect that you may not like or you may think he's a great guy. You cannot let that impact you either. And that's where I think people, they get emotional about things and they make mistakes and they make the wrong judgment call
Yeah.
on something. So that's the other thing. You got to keep your emotion out of it, because you can think somebody's the greatest guy in the world and he's a murderer, and vice versa. And you can get wrapped up in feeling empathy and sadness and outrage for victims as well. And you cannot let that impact your decision making and your analysis.
I feel that a very similar way about like reporting, having reported on some like heinous things, even like 9/11. It was easier when I was reporting to connect to the story of a person, let's say, who was murdered, when I didn't cover it, because when I was covering it, we over in journalism, we think we're on the side of angels too.
Right.
We have a mission. We have a job to do, and that job requires me setting aside my emotions. And I even remember this one tough story where I ended up on an investigative team investigating somebody that I really liked, and just knowing I got to throw out all my feelings here. Luckily, I got pulled off that one. But but it's the same thing in covering a case. But I have my exceptions, like the Lily Winans and the Julie Williams cases, and I think Phil, for you, is an exception. But I also wonder whether Karina's case stuck with me too, because I was just an outsider looking in, like everyone else, in this this mystery and this interesting human being. And I think one of the things too that really stuck out to me was, her friends were there to describe her, and they really described her in a really sort of beautiful light. But, her family was really silent, but you could tell, they were hurting. And there was just a heavy sadness that was around the case as an outsider looking in.
Yeah. And we talked about this before we started this recording, but my view of the case has evolved over my career because I know more. I'm obviously more educated, more experienced when I first started out, and I'm at a different point in my life. So the way I viewed it as a 29-year-old when I first got to Boston is very different. And now that I'm, a mother with 2 children that I've now sent out into the world. And so now I can really, I can only imagine, but I really can't grasp how painful it would be. But as a parent, I can relate as a parent. So that, how I felt about it as a 29-year-old is different than how I feel about it today. And it's, I look at it differently from a personal perspective, but I also look at it differently from a professional perspective. And not only that, it's not only my perspective, but my colleagues have helped me understand the case better as well, now that I've had the chance to talk it through with them and do our consult on the case. So
What do you think you learned about the case through the process of covering it and talking to Doug about it?
Well, what I learned, and I think when I start a case, they're just questions I want to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I think this was, first of all, her employer? Because he was the main suspect. It's like, is it somebody that's like that? Or is this somebody that's maybe killed before or again? And I'm not so certain about that. Do I think they're violent? Probably. Do I think they're cold, calculated, lack empathy? Yes. The other thing, motive. I don't know exactly what the motive is, but I do think it was a personal cause homicide. I don't believe necessarily it was a sexual murder. that is still a question I think I'm not sure about. But because we think that there was a connection with her killer, we lean toward personal cause.
Hmm.
So,
Also,
yeah.
just the coldness, and I don't know whether personal cause homicides are more like this, but sort of you see the ones where there's like a very far emotional extreme, and then ones like this that are very sort of like cold. Like, it doesn't feel like that place in the middle with sexually motivated murders where there's lots of fantasy involved in this one.
Right, we saw little fantasy. That's exactly, I think, part of the reason, um you've been listening. You excellent, excellent work. But no, in all seriousness, that's exactly there was not a lot of fantasy at play in this case. It's it seemed like potentially a different motive. Um, and so those are the types of things that I think I learned about the case. The practical aspect of the bisection, 'cause we've seen other cases of dismemberments, but this was the first case I actually looked at was just a bisection.
Straight bisection.
Yeah, there's been, ones we've had where there were, multiple body parts. The person was cut up basically. So it just clarified to me. And I think one of the main questions for me I wanted to answer, did I think her employer was involved?
Involved in it.
And my gut going into it was I didn't think so. It didn't really fit. It didn't make sense. And having gone through it all, it really makes even less sense. Just isn't. I'm pretty confident her
How would
employer
they
did
have
not.
gotten in touch? And he
It
sort of
doesn't
has
make
an
sense.
alibi. Yeah.
And the location of it,
Hmm.
yes, he had an apartment in Boston, but it was in South Boston. That apartment was thoroughly searched. She was not murdered there. So where is he going to kill her? Where is he going to take her? If he was going to take her anywhere, likely be out of town because that's where his home was. But, why bring her back in? None of that makes sense to us. It just does not fit with what we're seeing behaviorally, geographically.
But
And then
it would be, it'd be mildly insane for someone to do that, right? Like, kill her at the apartment or in Dover and then bring her back and do all those things. And then, you just made me think of something as you were describing that and essentially saying, even though you didn't use the words, how crazy that would be. If you saw some kind of like insanity or frenzy in the body, that would kind of fit some erratic behavior, but you actually see the opposite. You see like more of a rational thinker.
we'll see escalation. Usually when I mean by escalation, other injuries to her that show that a fight escalated. This was somebody knew they were gonna kill her, and that it was planned, or at least there was some element of planning to it. This wasn't a fight that got out of control and she ended up being strangled to death. There's no indication there was any other injuries or escalation, domestic type of violence situation. And then you just don't have a motive. And this is what drives me crazy is so many people speculating, well, he was having an affair with her, he got her pregnant. There is absolutely no evidence of any of that. And so you can't just make up stuff that doesn't exist. There's just not a motive. And he had an alibi. So he was, busy all weekend and he had their family members, but he was accounted for. And you have to remember this offender had control over her for a very long period of
Period of
time.
time.
He had access to her, control over her, and a private space for an extended period of time. It would make no sense for her employer to have been able to have carried that out.
What do you know about, does dissection take a lot of time or skill? Because, I remember you guys talking about this on the Elizabeth Short case. And in Elizabeth Short's case, there's a lot of speculation. It had to be like a surgeon or somebody who had medical experience. Well, it could be all sorts of things, right? Butchers,
Yeah.
people are good with knives, all sorts of things. But time and skill, like, can you tell me?
I don't believe that it takes a lot of time or skill to use a power saw. It's going to be very messy, obviously. It's gruesome and gory and messy and loud. So all of those considerations, but very skilled or, again, there's just not an indication that this person necessarily would have done this before. I just don't think it requires much skill.
You can sort of logic your way through.
Yeah. And the amount of time, I mean, I don't think it would take that much time.
With a power saw.
Yeah, I don't think it would take that much time. So,
but you would have a lot of mess to clean up.
Yeah. It was probably, I mean, I would assume it's done in, some kind of, someplace with a drain of some sort, maybe a bathtub or a garage with a drain or something, a shower, something along those lines. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a gruesome thought, but those are the things you have to consider when you're thinking about exactly what the offender did.
Right. Right. Because, it gives you clues about, do you think it's a solvable case?
I do. I don't know what evidence they have or what could be tested, but I'm always hopeful because, I saw a case not too long ago, it was the end of last year, I think, where it was like a case that I had profiled and somebody called in and said, I know who did this. This is from 1978.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was a double homicide and they got a phone call. The police or I don't know if it was the state police or district attorney's office or whatever, but they got a phone call. Somebody, I don't know who it was, what their relationship was to the offender, but they said this person killed these two people. And shortly thereafter, they arrested him. And they arrested him because there was a fingerprint at the crime scene. And they were able to match his fingerprint.
To it. So something, not even DNA, not even
DNA. It's amazing. And that was a case where I was a little bit, I thought that would be a harder one. But then out of the blue, somebody calls. It's amazing to me.
Says, look at this guy. Or I remember hearing that thing on this night. Or
it was so interesting too, because I saw the headline and I'm like, oh, that kind of sounds familiar. And I go to the article and I'm like, I profiled that case. Oh my gosh. It was, and I reached out to the district attorney and I said, this is fantastic. I profiled that case. I can't wait to hear all about it someday. So it hasn't been adjudicated yet. I don't know what's going to happen with it. I don't know what the updates are, but once it's completely adjudicated, I want to cover it on the show. Because now that it's, going through the legal process, I don't want to talk about it. But it was a case I wanted to cover on the show because it was unsolved. But it's just such an incredible feeling when you see that. I'm like, this kind of sounds like sounds like this case. I'm like, it is this case.
Like, it is that case.
Like, this was incredible. It was an incredible story. Somebody just, I have all these questions, which hopefully they'll be able to answer for me once it's all said and done. But now they can't tell me for obvious reasons. But, who was this person? What was their relationship with the offender? How did they know that he did it? Were they with him? All of these things. This, I just can't wait to hear exactly. Because once we hear that, that's just another bit of information that we can apply to other cases.
Yeah.
And that's why that case, I'm like, there's always hope.
Yeah.
Always.
Right.
And that was one of the cases I thought, that's going to be a harder one to solve.
It's a tough one to get.
Yeah. And then out of the blue.
Yeah.
It's incredible for me. And for me,
well, but
it's so
true.
selfish to say. It's incredible for me. I mean, it's incredible for family, for investigator. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's exciting.
It is
And
exciting.
I think we get focused too on the forensics because of all the amazing things that are happening in forensics. I know they just closed, they announced it this morning as we're recording. They connected one of the peripheral victims to the Colonial Parkways murders, to Alan Wade Wilmer, or Junior. Or no, he's senior, excuse me. So I don't want to put Junior there in the bucket with him. But it was a case where they didn't think they had DNA for years, and then realized they had DNA, and then were finally able to make a connection. But I do hear a lot of cases of somebody spends 20 years in their head having some suspicion that it was my crazy neighbor Joe or my friend or my cousin, and that they come forward, maybe not even thinking that they have something that's enormously relevant, and it ends up being very important to the direction of the case. So, I always tell people, just say something. It's not going to hurt to say something.
Yeah.
If you think there's something.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure they got the call and they're like, okay. But
Sure.
but it's not like it was a really high profile case where it brings a lot of, interesting people out of the woodwork. This was I don't want to say obscure, but it just wasn't a high profile case. It was not even high profile in the area. It was, so probably when they got the call, they were probably like,
Someone's calling about this case. Right.
yeah, this isn't some, random crazy person calling about a really high profile case. This is a very specific case that's not that high profile. So I bet they were probably thinking, this could be
It's interesting.
it. Yeah. I can't wait to talk to them about that moment, and hopefully they'll talk to me, go on the show and
Yeah.
talk about the case, because it is a very interesting case. But that's why I think, I never, ever lose hope. And how, if somebody like me loses hope, how can families ever have hope?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I've seen over my career, I become more hopeful as I get older because of all of the advances in technology and what I've seen, how cases get solved and relationships change. And, I've seen so many cases now throughout my career that have been solved that
Yeah.
many thought maybe were never going to be solved. So that's why I don't really lose any hope.
It's interesting you say that, because if I think of a lot of the cases that you guys covered that I was familiar with before, Robert Wan is an
Mhm.
example who, was murdered, in his friend's house in DC. I thought, having followed that case, I was like, well, that's never officially going to be solved. Like, we generally know the pool of people, but that's never going to be solved. And it's interesting that in a lot of other cases that I thought would never close, I actually have hope for them now. And you made that point about like relationships change, circumstances change, people go to confessions, they find God, and it's not always the suspect who finds God that changes it. They get sober, or the divorce, or there's a whatever. Things
Mhm.
change, alliances split, clues come together, you know.
Yeah, you never know. I always try to have hope. And like I said, I've seen cases that I thought probably weren't going to get solved, and they do. And every single day there's a case you'll see, maybe not every day, but comes into my news feed. DNA solved this case. Mostly it is the DNA. And it's a matter of detectives going back and retesting pieces of evidence and using the advances in technology and this increased sensitivities, as well as the legwork that goes into the forensic genetic genealogy. It's really a lot of work.
Yeah. It
It's
takes time.
quite a bit of work. So it's not like you can just snap your fingers and IgG solves a case. There's a lot of legwork. So it's a matter of prioritizing the cold cases for, okay, which cases are we most likely to have evidence that we would get DNA from? And you have to sort through all of that. Then you have to go through the testing process. And then you have to go if you
The
can get a
family
profile.
tree, right?
Yes. It's a
It's
lot
really the
of
beginning.
work. And as we know with Philip's case, it's quite possible his offender is foreign born. And so the database may not have the representation needed to do the genetic genealogy at this point. But someday I have hope.
Yep.
I wholeheartedly believe Philip's case will be solved.
Solved at some point.
There's DNA.
Yeah. A lot of it. Or at least it certainly seems like there's a lot of it. In a case like this where we don't necessarily know if there is any DNA, and I'm not sure what happened. I don't think they were able to get that fingerprint, or at least they didn't announce it on a.
I think it was not usable.
It wasn't
I believe.
usable.
I believe so, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
Where do you have hope for these cases? Is it just somebody seeing or knowing or saying something?
Possibly, yes. Or going back and retesting items.
So, yep.
But this case, I don't think they have a lot to test. That is the struggle with this case. Or somebody finds something in somebody's belongings, or somebody makes a confession. People do make deathbed confessions.
Yeah.
They do.
There's a recent case in the Midwest that caught my attention. Wow.
Yeah. This particular offender in Karina's case, I would not predict that happening. But has it happened in other cases? It has happened. So in this case, I would hold out hope for somebody that knew the offender and has a feeling they did it, and whether they could ever charge that person or convict them, I don't know. But
yeah, one of the things I think that, in thinking about it, that bothers me about this case is that it sort of feels like, and I think talking about Phil's case really, and I think it's kind of infuriating to me, but I'm just left with this feeling with what I know about the case that like this offender is just sleeping just fine. And that's something about that just bothers me.
Yeah. Oh, it bothers me too. I mean, I do think about this occasionally when we cover a case and we do a profile of an unknown offender and we talk about motivation. If they are listening, they know we're right.
Mm-hmm.
I know it. Like, I'm right about you. And it sounds a little bit, but I do think about that. And I hope that,
stings a little bit.
And then maybe not just from let's our show, but just the fact that they are aware of the advances in technology, and he doesn't necessarily know what he may have left behind. I mean, this is 1996. So I like to think he's lived uncomfortably looking over his shoulder, worrying about himself, but just thinking maybe someday it could catch up to me. But you're right. I don't think he feels a lot of guilt about it. He probably, gets uncomfortable or reads the news when they cover the case, but it's probably no more than that.
Probably wonders what they actually have, because, the Boston Police Department, say what you will about them, I do think they know how to investigate a homicide.
They do know. Like when people want to question, they did the search warrant at the employer's apartment. And I'm like, if she was murdered there and bisected there, they would have found the evidence. So they have a good crime scene team. They knew what they're doing. I am confident that they processed that scene appropriately. And I do know their work. And that, that's my opinion. People can question that. And I don't think that they've, I don't think there's been too many people that have been critical of the effort that because they put a lot of effort into this case. But I have all the confidence in the world she was not killed in that apartment. They did a complete search warrant there, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a case where, like, I hate to say the word smart offender, but a smart enough offender and some really bad timing, in terms of her being off, just puts you behind the eight ball. And sometimes the best investigative work in the world, is not going to get you a quick answer. But I think having resilience and, like you said, having hope, because we've probably both seen cases where police departments have kind of given up. They've kind of thrown their hands up. And I think you have to at least keep the hope that something, hope is a double-edged sword, but hope that just and I hope that family gets peace and justice, because no one deserves to lose their 20-year-old sister, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
away at what should be like, the brightest point of her life. And I think that's a part of it too, for me too. It did seem like this was a bright part of her life before she died.
I'm not certain about it. I think she was excited to come to the United States. I think she was a little bit frustrated with her job, in that she liked the part of caring for the children. She was very good at it and did a very good job. What she didn't like or expect was the amount of cooking and cleaning, the housework part of it. So, I think she didn't like that part of it. And she did write, this is where it's really hard to call this a red herring in light of what happened, but she did write to a friend that something terrible had happened. And she would tell her about it when she got home. And she was making arrangements, although it wasn't immediate. She was making arrangements to go home. And we don't know what that was. Nobody's, ever been able to identify what that terrible thing happened. But it's really tough to say it's unrelated based on what happened to her.
Yeah. And I had forgotten about that piece of it until now. I know you guys talked about it, but one of the things about that's very significant to me is whatever it was big enough. She didn't want to tell him on the phone, didn't want to tell him in a private letter, that it was, whether it's connected to the murder or not, it was something very significant. And the fact that nobody else has come forward to say, this is probably what she was talking about, or this thing, suggests she didn't tell any of her friends around her.
Yeah. And it's possible the Boston Police Department does know what that was, but that's never been something that's been made public. But I don't, I don't want to discount that was not perhaps related.
Did the police department ever rule anyone out? And I say that with a caveat of asterisks, that you were ruled out till you're ruled back in. But did they rule any? Did they ever say in this case?
I think they may have said they ruled out the guy she was seen talking to downtown who had the dog. I think
man with the dog.
I don't know if he was officially ruled out. But I'm not aware of anyone who's publicly been cleared. Yeah. And I could be wrong. I could have. I just am not aware of that.
Yeah.
So.
It's definitely an interesting suspect, let's so say, and I really do hope they bring some closure to it. Let me give you a chance to just kind of throw it to you on kind of what I'm just curious about as we close, like. And I'm thinking as much about this case as the podcast in general. What do you think that we can sort of learn from cases like this, whether it's because we're interested in solving them, or we're interested in true crime, or we're interested in going into law enforcement? Because, one of the things, and I've said this 1,000 times, that I really appreciate about your podcast and the approach you're able to strip away so much of the noise and the bias. And it's funny. Brett and Alice call themselves the Cold War prosecutors, and you guys are like the Cold War profilers. But I love it because you take the emotion out of it, so we get the space for logic. And I was going to say, I find it very comforting. It's like the calmest true crime podcasting that I listen to. But what are you hoping people get out of that?
Well, for this case in particular, I want to, and I don't think our listeners generally, and I don't think your listeners do this or ever would do this, but just don't publicly accuse people and ruin their lives when you don't have the evidence, when you're not the investigator. You have to be so careful about that. And I know there are some cases out there where it is so obvious that the husband did it. And it's hard not, but in cases like this where there's really no evidence and all the evidence, you're having to create scenarios in your mind to make it fit. Like, for example, he got her pregnant. There's absolutely
evidence for it.
There's no evidence. And so when you have to do that, just catch yourself doing that and step back and say, I don't really know. Yeah. And so this particular case, I think that is just what I would take away from this case is that, a man and his family was dragged through the media mud, and there continues to be online speculation here and there that is very unwarranted and unfair. So that's what I would caution from this particular case. And where I will end it is we did have a listener who had some information, and she didn't think it was important. She lived in the area at the time, and she just had something, and she was concerned and cautious about, should I call this in? And I would tell people, yes, if you have something, let the police decide if it's important. Don't feel stupid. Don't feel embarrassed. They get calls like this. If you have genuine information that you think could be helpful, pick up the phone and call.
Share it. It's not going to
share it. Yes,
yeah.
You never know, because you don't know what other pieces of information they have. And so I think she ended up doing it, but it was just something that I think people, they feel silly, or maybe this wasn't anything, or maybe, but you never know. It could fill in a hole or a gap, or it could relate to something else somebody reported. You never know. So I would just say, if anyone has any information about this case, you can call the Boston Police Department Homicide Unit. They have a tip line. They have a way to anonymously report crimes. Report it if you have any information. And not only for this case, any of the cases that we cover, report it. Even the slightest thing, you just never know, because you're not the one investigating the case. You don't have all the pieces or all the information. You don't know what could possibly be important. Let the police decide.
Figure it out. Yeah. Yeah. What is that saying we have post? If you see something, say something post 9/11. I think it's a good way to look at things. And then the other thing I take from what you're saying is start with the facts and then find the theory. Don't start with the theory and try to find facts for your theory.
Right. Yeah. When you have to create those stories, you're doing somebody wrong.
Leave it to the novelist.
Right. That's just particular to this case, but it has happened in other cases where people have been wrongfully accused, and by our profile, they probably didn't do it. So,
yeah, it's too. And so, and I guess that's also a part of, it's part of the mission of your podcast is it's education, and it's education for the public, but also for people in law enforcement. And it's a resource and a library that people can fall on to learn and do things. And I think, we need more of a fact-based world these days.
I'll tell you, I am really proud of our listener base. We have students, young people who want to get into law enforcement or criminal profiling. We have law enforcement investigators who listen to our show, and that is I'm honored. I'm
Mhm.
honored by that,
Yeah.
that people are listening to our show to learn something. And I know that I continue to learn. That's why I do it. I continue to learn from my colleagues. Every time we cover a case, I learn something new. And it makes me very happy that other people are learning things and that we can bring attention to cases.
Yeah. And I'm constantly, as you know, learning from you every Sunday or Monday when one of your episodes comes out on Patreon.
And I'm
My,
learning from you as well. We have great
I'm not sure what.
great great debates about things.
Yes,
Well,
true.
you certainly have the background in psychology that I don't have. In fact, sometimes I don't actually understand what you're saying. I'm like,
You're like,
that's
wait a
too,
second. Hold on.
but I don't understand. Okay, let's dumb it down, Jason. I
I
need
have this habit.
simple.
Right?
It's like, oh, what is he?
Where is
And
he
I'm
going
like,
with that one?
yes, he's bad. That's my yeah, he's a bad guy, Jason.
So, like motivation theory.
Yes, you have a lot of the theories and yeah,
Yeah.
like,
And
oh, that's what that means.
yeah, and it's just yeah, and for me, it's like interesting watching you guys and the diversity of sort of like experience or knowledge. I am constantly myself learning things and making connections based on my own knowledge base, but you guys have such a broad and varied and you know uh yeah, it's just really a pleasure. I'm glad your podcast here. You've known this because the first time you came on to the podcast, I probably said for months, you really should start your podcast again. You really should start your podcast again.
Well, we're
But I'm
going
glad you
strong.
did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, until the next time, my friend.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Thanks for joining me for the second conversation with Julia about the Karina Holmer case. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again soon.